Welcome back, everybody. WHIP Radio here in Philadelphia. Zach Gelb and Mike Zahn here with you, taking up until noon Eastern time, where the Temple Sports Hour will come your way. Time in the WHIP studios is 11:15. And now joining us on the program is a good friend of the show. He's the assistant editor of OwlScoop, and that is Kyle Gauss. Kyle, Zach, and Mike here on Temple's campus. Thanks for a few minutes, and how are you?
Hey, thanks, Scott. I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great, and we appreciate you coming on. And I like to call you the stat lord of OwlScoop and all of Temple football because you always give us great stats on your Twitter. And I was reading your Twitter bio, and I never realized this till today. And it said, Al Golden once told you have an eye for evaluating talent. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, this was probably a weekly press conference back in 2009. I think it was my first year on the beat. At the time, I was doing these game previews for OwlScoop, so I would highlight a player from the other team and ask Al about and try to get a quote. So I think I mentioned a linebacker against Ohio, and then Al was like, "Oh man, Kyle, you know how to pick him." And I'm under the impression that linebacker maybe had 2 tackles in the game against them. So he might have given me a little more credit than I deserved.
Now, Zach makes a comment all the time about how you're one of his favorite people to follow on Twitter, and I don't know if you know, but he's very sincere when he says that, and I have to agree that you provide us with incredible statistics, an array of statistics. How do you have those statistics at your fingertips that when a play happens, you seem to suddenly tweet within seconds later of exactly the stat that everyone wants to know?
So I think it's kind of two-pronged. And one, I appreciate the compliments. I don't think I'm that great of a follow, but by all means.
Well, you're wrong. You should have some more self-confidence because you always think I'm sarcastic when I say that. You really are a great follow on Twitter.
That's true. I just because of the relationship Zach and I have, I always kind of assume it's sarcastic. But so to answer the original question, I mean, it's kind of two-pronged. One is I usually kind of just get a gut feeling, hey, if this guy's up to 25 carries, when was the last time that happened? And then two, the more fundamental reason, I actually, in the off season, and I've spent a lot of time on this, I actually have a personal database of Temple stats. So basically every game-by-game performance since 2000 and every season performance since the FBS era in 1971. So it's very queryable, so I'm able to just put in when was the last time this person did this, and it kind of spits out the answer. So it's partially me, and it's partially just a very elaborate Excel sheet.
Gotcha. All right, so let's get to some of the news that you did have today. You broke this story. Zaire Williams is out with the Temple football team. 2 years ago, he was their leading rusher with 533 yards. He missed that Memphis game to end that season, and then he was hurt all of last year. Why did things not work out with Zaire Williams?
Yeah, I think part of it is, he misses that Memphis game his freshman year because I believe at the time he was late for a Thanksgiving event, so they ended up just bringing other running backs and playing Jamie Gilmore a lot in that game. And then heading into the next season, in a season where they needed somebody to step up, they needed somebody to become that go-to running back, he was just kind of buried on the depth chart. A lot of it might have been lack of effort on his part. A lot of it might have just been that the offensive line wasn't run blocking, but he just never really emerged. They shut him down after that Vanderbilt game, and then they switched him to linebacker in the offseason. So when he had the opportunity to take the reins, become the go-to guy, he didn't do it, and then Temple brings in 3 really high-quality freshman running backs, and then Jihad Thomas sees an opportunity as well. So I think he kind of saw the writing on the wall. It's important to note that he is still enrolled at the university. There's nothing preventing him really from coming back to the team if the coaching staff and him both agreed it's worthwhile. But for now, he's not part of the program.
And they did move him in the offseason to linebacker, like you mentioned, and they have a lot of depth at running back. But the guy that has just really ran with this position at the running back spot has been Jihad Thomas. Going into the year, do you think he was going to produce at this rate? Because I don't think a lot of people saw this one coming.
No, I don't even think Jihad saw this coming. It really came out of nowhere. They're really, not only is he having success, he's having success with a large volume of carries. I think I just ran this. So he's on pace for, if Temple played 12 games, he would have 300 rushing attempts. If they played 13, 325. If you played 14, they'd have 350. So 350 would actually be the Temple record. The record's 346 attempts by Paul Palmer during his Heisman runner-up year. And this is the interesting stat for me. So nationwide, since 2010, 27 players have rushed the ball more than 300 times in a season. Only 3 of those did it at a weight less than 200 pounds. So Jihad's kind of generously listed at 5'10", 180. Not really held up. Not really designed to hold up for a full season of this many carries. So I think it'll be interesting just to see how many carries they do give to backs like Rockwell Armstead to kind of take some of the pressure off Thomas.
We're talking to the assistant editor of OwlScoop, Kyle Gauss. And Kyle, Temple has 3 conference games coming up before they face a big game in Notre Dame at home on Halloween. There's a lot of assuming I'm about to throw out here, but assuming that they win these 3 games, how high do you think Temple would be ranked going into that Notre Dame game, assuming that they win these next 3 games?
You know, a big step in the rising in the rankings is just getting in the rankings the first time. So right now they're the 4th or 5th team out with receiving votes. They're 29th overall. So there's not that much, like last week was a lot of turnover, a lot of ranked games, ranked team playing other ranked teams. This week there's only a handful, so unless there's major upsets, it might be hard for Temple to even get in this week if they get up to 5-0. So let's say they get in at 6-0, and let's say they beat ECU at 7-0. It's not out of the realm of possibility for them to be 19, 20, 21, but that first step is just kind of cracking that top 25, because then after that, a lot of pollsters will just go, oh, Team A and Team B lost, let's just slide the teams behind them up. So it's a lot easier to be on people's radar when you already have that number next to your name.
Well, certainly a lot of people at Temple University would love to see that number next to the name. It hasn't happened since 1979, and a lot of things have to happen for that to ultimately happen of the number next to Temple. And one of the things is obviously Tulane coming up this weekend, and they're heavy favorites. I believe I saw the spread recently was 14-point favorites. What does Temple need to do to make sure that they win by 3+ scores against Tulane on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, it seems like I'm boiling it down too much, but it's really just playing your game of football and limiting Tulane on the ground. So Tulane's 2-2 on the year. In wins, they're averaging 187.5 yards per game, which is rushing yards per game, which is 4.4 yards per carry. But in losses, they're averaging only 48 rushing yards per game at 1.7 yards per carry. So, I mean, that seems kind of obvious, like, hey, when you're losing, you're not performing as well, but it really seems like if you stop Tulane on the ground and you really force Tanner Lee to have to throw the ball, which he has had success doing, that's kind of how you beat Tulane.
We've heard Matt Rule say it. It's not about them, it's about us, and we have to focus on what Temple is going to do. And when you take a look at Temple's offense, it's been a simple formula throughout the entire year when you've seen success from that unit. One, win the battle in the trenches, establish that run game, and then it opens up into the play action, which you saw later on in that game up against Charlotte. But Temple this year, they got off to a few slow starts. Penn State, they were in the first quarter, they got shut out by a score of 10-0. They didn't get off to the hottest starts up against UMass and Charlotte. How does Temple get off to a better start up against Tulane?
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. You try to get Jahad Thomas going, and then you do what you did in Charlotte, which is try to hit him off the play action. You try to take shots deep. It really was kind of strange where it was essentially a hurricane, monsoon in Charlotte, and Temple still made a really conscious effort to take shots. I mean, Robbie Anderson drops 2 potential touchdown passes before redeeming himself later on. So I think you get Jahad going, you get Armstead going, you out-physical a team that, quite frankly, you're more talented than, and then you take your opportunities while you can. Rule's made a lot of comments about how pressure is it's a privilege. So Temple's undefeated. Tulane's definitely going to be up for this game. You're on the road. You're trying to spoil somebody's homecoming. You survive that initial surge from Tulane, you respond with some strikes of your own, and then next thing you know, you're hopefully on your way to 5-0.
We're talking to Kyle Gauss, the assistant editor of OwlScoop.com. Excellent slate. Make sure you check it out. Let's get to the defense. I thought something really interesting from yesterday's press conference with Matt Rule was he was talking about the pass rush, and they don't necessarily evaluate it by sack numbers, but they evaluate it by how long the opposing team's quarterback has to throw the football. Because if you look at the numbers, Temple had 10 sacks up against Penn State, and then after that, they've only had 2. How would you evaluate this Temple's pass rush?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a little bit coach speak on Rule's part, because if they had 22 sacks right now, they'd be praising the fact they had 22 sacks, especially considering coming into the season, they kept mentioning how, hey, we have this team goal of 40 sacks, and we want to get to 40 sacks. So that being said, he's kind of right. They've definitely disrupted the quarterback. Praise Martinguez really in the past 2 games when he's actually starting to get a little bit healthy. He's getting some pressure. Nate D. Smith, despite the fact that they've only had 2 sacks in the last couple games, second in the conference. So I think that's a role where Nate D. Smith really excels and brings some extra talent to the defensive line, and they have a talented defensive line. I mean, Matt Ioannidis, he might not jump out to you on a box score, but he's having maybe his best season ever. So they're definitely doing well. I think they say, hey, we're happy just putting pressure on the quarterback, but I'd also think they'd be quite content if they come out against Tulane and have 6, 7, 8 sacks.
The big but obvious set going into this week is 400. Tyler Matakevich is 8 tackles away from getting 400 career tackles. You think of Steve Conjar, you think of Joe Klecko. Where does Matakevich rank among the all-time great Temple football defensive players?
Yeah, I think he's up there. It's important to note with Steve Conjar, he did it in 3 seasons. Freshmen weren't really playing at the time, so he had 492 tackles in 3 years. That being said, Tyler Matakevich, at least in the time I've been watching, may be up there with Muhammad Wilkerson as the best Temple defensive players of this era. He has an outside chance of becoming Temple's leading tackler, especially if they go to a conference championship game and a bowl game. He has a chance. He's exactly 100 behind right now. So if you had 10 more games, you do 10 tackles a game, you get to 100 more. So statistically, he's up there, and just talent-wise, he's up there. It'll be interesting, in my opinion, to kind of see how he projects to the next level.
The Temple Owls are 4-0 for the first time in 41 years, which is an exciting statistic for a lot of Temple Owl fans, and that's an easy one to look up, 4-0 for the first time in 41 years. Even if some Philadelphia columnists don't think that the Temple Owls draw a great crowd.
Who, Mike Silsky?
I guess so. What do you expect the crowd to look like for the second game? After winning 3 straight on the road, what do you expect the crowd to look like at homecoming?
Sure. So a lot of it kind of comes down to weather. I mean, as weird as it sounds, because it's not really a problem, with other schools that are threatening to be in the top 25. Temple fans historically don't come out when it's pouring. Initially, it looked like it was going to rain. Now I think it's looking a little more favorable, so we'll see for Saturday. And then it's homecoming. Every year it's the biggest walk-up crowd out of other Temple games. So I think that combined with the fact that they sold more season tickets this year due to the Penn State and Notre Dame game, it wouldn't surprise me to see an announced crowd of 35, 36, 37, but actual butts in the seat, you're probably looking in the 20s. But if they can get an announced crowd in the 30s, that's good. It's a step in the right direction.
Before we let you run, 2 years ago, Robbie Anderson had 44 receptions for 791 yards and totaled 9 touchdowns. This year, 15 receptions, 147 yards for 3 touchdowns. Did have those 2 big drops, like you mentioned earlier in the interview, up against Charlotte. But for the rest of the year, now he's had a few games to get back and get acclimated to playing college football. Where do you project Robbie to finish at?
Well, that year that he had in 2013 was a lot of playing from behind, a lot of chucking it deep and hoping that Robbie can beat his man. So a lot of those stats were almost padded stats, especially considering I think 229 of those yards came against SMU.
They also have more depth, too.
Yeah, they have a lot more depth. I mean, they have a lot more wide receivers. I think to answer your question, wouldn't surprise me to see Robbie push for double digits in receiving touchdowns. As far as yards, he's probably not going to get to that 800 that he was at in 2013. So I think it's important for him to realize he doesn't have to do everything. I mean, they have Adonis Jennings. They have Ventel Bryant's going to be a redshirt freshman. Ventel Bryant's going to be great in a couple years. So statistically, he might not be all up there, but playing-wise, he's definitely adding an extra element to the team. I think, let me see. So since 2000, the Temple players had 2 or more touchdowns in a game 18 times. Robbie has 4 of those games. So he's a dynamic receiver. He brings a lot to this team. Just might not always show up on the box score.
Kyle, you're the best. We appreciate a few minutes today. Thanks so much, man.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a good one.
All right,
Thank
there's
you.
Kyle Gauss from OwlScoop joining us on the hotline right there. How about that? Some of those stats are just absolutely ridiculous, and that's why I call him the stat lord. And people go, oh, you got to stop messing around, because I like to give OwlScoop, a lot of those guys, nicknames. I call John DiCarlo the Pope of Temple Athletics. Back to a story when we were in an airport going to Vanderbilt, and all these fans started coming up to John and taking pictures with him and all that great stuff. But the stat about Jihad Thomas, how he
and his weight.
incorporated a stat and then a weight, it's just absolutely ridiculous. Well, I don't get where he finds this stuff.
Well, you know what? We need access to that Excel sheet. Let me tell you, our broadcast would be top notch if we could get that Excel sheet.
We have to pull a St. Louis Cardinals and maybe do some hacking into that stat sheet. In that Excel document. But that's Kyle Gauss from OwlScoop, the assistant editor of OwlScoop. Check out him and John DiCarlo and all the great other writers via OwlScoop, which is part of the Yahoo network. So make sure you do that. Time in the WHIP studios is 11:30 right now. We'll take a quick break, and when we get back, I want to give you a quote from Chip Kelly that just shows you why the Eagles season is going to be a disaster this year. And also, we got Stanley Cup final predictions as the NHL season gets going tonight. He's Mike Zahn. I'm Zach Gelb. We'll take a quick break and be right back.